Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. If there's one compliance you should ever do, it's to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our first story of the day is by Eli was taken. What ice cream flavor do you want? So some chili posts made me think about a story my stepdad sometimes tells. When he was a kid, he'd often hang out with some friends at one of said friends' homes, where friend's mom would make homemade ice cream. When asked what flavor they wanted, one of the kids, being a smart butt, regularly asked for sauerkraut flavor. Now you all guessed where this was going. Guess whose grin quickly faded when presented with a fairly large tub of fresh, homemade sauerkraut ice cream. And he had to sit there until he finished his bowl while the other kids went outside to play. Never mess with whoever's in charge of your food. I get kids will be kids, but when kids are presented with an option to get an ice cream flavor, you'd think most of them would say chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and just jump at whatever great flavor they want. Not a wisecracking kid saying sauerkraut. That said, what flavor ice cream do you guys want? Let me know in the comments down below. For me, probably some really good cookie dough ice cream with little bits of cookie dough all throughout. I found that I'm the kind of person that really loves ice cream with little treats all sprinkled throughout there. I don't know what that says about me. Our next story is by LLKM1994. Ignore the specs? So I've been a few things ranging from senior management in retail to digging holes in some godforsaken building site. But a few of the stories I've read have made me recall the time one of my laborers nearly lost a limb to a sliding gate. A few years back, I was a fabricator and site automaton for sliding gates, which we mainly installed on massive industrial complexes. These gates were usually massive and very heavy to account for the freakery that usually occurs with site fitters rushing to get back and go. The gate I had to install was a massive feat of steel and weight, so when it came to working out prices and location for the work the customer wants, it works, but we'll have to deal with their maintenance company for the digging and concreting with the dopiest boss of actually quite a good team. But this guy could argue he was doing nothing wrong with every small thing that happened. Yeah, one of those guys. The one major thing the customer had asked us specifically for was a cantilever sliding gate. As he said, I don't want to see any tracks along the road. Works for us, just means a slightly higher bill. I and the site survey guy go out from our workshop to go and take some measurements and position the cables for the motor and let the maintenance team know of the serious hole we were about to put in one of the flower beds for the anchor system. This went down swimmingly with the manager there. The way a cantilever gate works is by using a hollow track similar to what pulleys use to slide along an expanse of an opening. The cantilever system has to be anchored in the heaviest concrete block you can make with two sets of wheels set a certain distance apart. We build the gate to the sizes and get it to powder coaters for finishing. Then came the day to start digging the hole. All we had to do was wire in the safety circuits and motor for the gate, and the maintenance manager was given explicit instructions to dig a hole exactly 2 meters by 3 meters deep. This will be relevant. After much arguing about why the hole needs to be this specific size and what about the flower bed, we assume he gets the message after showing him drawings and calculations to do with weight over distance. Fast forward to a couple of weeks later, and the gate is ready to be picked up. We get the gate to the site courtesy of someone with a HIAB, crane lorry, to lift it in place and hold it there. One of the maintenance boys comes over to give us a hand with running the cable for the safety edge on the front edge of the gate. We get the gate set onto the anchor system and let the crane operator let the gate down slowly until I see the entire concrete block move slightly, and my rear end puckered up tighter than a snare drum. Visions of this going bad were all I could think of. All the while, the dopey maintenance boss is standing there grinning away while one of his laborers is under the anchor system trying to jimmy this thing in place. I wave to the crane operator and tell him to hold it there. I speak to him away from the maintenance manager and say the block is moving and there's a guy in the way. So he suggests we get him out of there and use the crane to jimmy it in place. So that's what we do until the entire anchor system gives up and roughly 800 kilograms of steel and powder coat come crashing down where the poor laborer's legs were. If he hadn't moved, they would have been impaled and crushed. Chaos ensued, and by the time I looked around, the maintenance manager had disappeared. So I inspected the result of the chaos, and after carefully checking the concrete block for cracks, which it did have, I noticed the sizes were correct, but the depth could be out, hence the moving slab of concrete. So with the gate out of the way, we used the crane to pull out the block and set it aside. This block should have had a depth of 3 meters, but was stopped at 1.5. Needless to say, I was pissed. This thing had cost my company the best part of 4,000 British pounds to build and easily 1,000 pounds to powder coat. This gate was big. And the damage done to the road, which brought the attention of the local council and consequently billed the maintenance company for the repairs. A few days later, I get a call from the customer asking what instructions had been given, and knowing the team I work with, it had to be written down somewhere. So after a quick back and forth about what was written and what the exact specifications were, radio silence. We were eventually called back to the site with a fresh block of concrete and the supports for the wheels in place, so the rest of the work left was to fit and automate the gate. The only difference was the maintenance manager was nowhere to be found. After asking what happened, the company lost the contract on that location and he ended up fired after endangering his staff and damage to council property. They came in hard with the bill. No maintenance company will go anywhere near him now as word travels like wildfire, and with everyone saying that he couldn't follow simple instructions, they tend to nope out of it big time. All in all, a happy customer and an unhappy maintenance manager. Yeah, I don't know about you, but if a guy comes up whose job is to tell you exactly what you need to do, and they say this needs to be 2 by 3 meters deep, and you know that's a concrete support, the last thing I would do would be like, let's skimp on this a little bit. That guy said 3 meters, but half of that will probably hold this whole thing up. What could go wrong? Crush somebody's legs? Oh wait. This next story is by Diligent Cockroach 700. Pub landlady gets more than she bargained for. This was the 70s in England. In those days, I was a biker. Not a Hell's Angel type, just enjoyed riding motorcycles along with a group of like-minded young men. In those days, it was mainly British-made bikes, Nortons, Triumphs, BSAs, etc. Bikers had a rather questionable reputation in those days, mainly due to the bad press the above-mentioned Hells Angels got. And many pubs wouldn't allow bikers at all. We used to frequent a few biker-friendly pubs in our area. One such pub recently changed management. We turned up on a hot summer's evening and were told we would still be welcome but had to take off our leathers. One of my mates was wearing a very expensive one-piece racing leather, and after the rest of us had divested ourselves of various leather jackets and stuff, he was still wearing it. He was standing at the bar to order a drink when the new landlady came over and told him he would not be served until he removed his leather. He said, "Are you sure?" And she said yes. So he started, undid the zip and took it off, and stood there butt naked while we all cheered. She got him dressed again pretty quickly, and he got his beer. You know, if you go up to somebody and you ask them to take off a piece of clothing and it's not somebody you actually want to see with less clothing on, and their only response is, "Are you sure?" might be worth rethinking or asking a question or two extra in that situation. Our next story is by DRWCHRRS. The empty cabinets are not enough space for you? Okay then. To start off this tale of pettiness coupled with that sweet revenge, I'll give background as to why this outcome perplexed and enraged at the same time. I've lived on my own for a while now, and therefore have furnished the houses I live in. That means bathrooms, living rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, cleaning supplies, etc. When I moved into this new abode, I was no longer renting the entire house, just the master bedroom and the garage. The other rooms were rented by college students, ages 18, 34, 63. I know, 63? Anyways, when I moved in, I asked the landlord about furnishing the house, and the reply was they would love for me to do that, and then the other tenants can use my dishes and cookware and silverware. Pretty nice gesture to make for broke college students, right? Well, down the road, this assumption would be wrong. It had been 3 months with the kitchen and house fully stocked with room to spare for storage and shelf space. Suddenly, a rep from the housing company shows up and says she's there to help us organize and schedule cleaning. Okay. Thanks, new random unwanted mom? Note, I've been saying every month to the other tenants, if you want to put something in the kitchen or other places in the house, just tell me and we can move stuff around. Apparently this was too difficult because now this lady's here putting labels with everyone's names on the shelves and drawers via the complaints of the other tenants. Everyone now has one cabinet and one drawer in the kitchen, and the space use is completely horrid. Instead of being able to use all the space in a cabinet for plates, there's now 2 plates on a shelf in each cabinet, because everyone needed their own space. Also, there were plenty of empty cabinet and drawer space already for weeks unused. Don't let the plates touch, they have cooties. Now, I had to remove all the shared cookware, bowls, plates, cleaning supplies, silverware, cups, etc. because they belong to me, and I have no space for pantry food and all that stuff in one cabinet. Onto the petty revenge side, rubbing hands together with a devious, if I dare say dastardly smile. Well, since you children need to have your space defined and labeled, and you seem to take for granted the fully stocked kitchen and household I have provided, let us now see how you like none of those things. The anticipation was almost too much to bear, joined by the rage inside. It was almost as good as some types of drugs. OP stuck their head out there, was willing to buy stuff and share stuff, and even was willing to kind of manage the setup to make it work for everybody. And like OP said, all these kids probably that moved in here for the first time living on their own, they couldn't handle something like that. All I can say is in that situation, OP in my books is more than obligated to take all their stuff back. Our next story is by DodoHead974. The provided lunch is for those who work through lunch only. You got it. The company I work for, and specifically the team I used to belong to, was one team of a department of like 60 operations people, and twice a month we had peak days, which were just high volume and crazy. To help on these days, one day the management team decides to start buying the department lunch on these days so we can work through our lunch and not have to worry about food. Now, please keep in the back of your mind that this is enough food for the 60 staffers and the 20 or so managers and supervisors. Now this goes on for about 3 months, and we work through our lunch and always finish the work and put in our overtime. No issues. But now it's my manager's turn to set up the food order. But she can't just do that. No, she needs to project her skills, so she makes an announcement to the whole department. It's been brought to my attention that some of you have been taking food and not skipping your lunches. The provided food is for those who work through lunch only. Now if she had ended it there, that would have been one thing. But she didn't. She adds, and for the record, overtime will not be approved if you take the food. We're providing you lunch in exchange for your time. Barring how illegal this is, we're all pissed and start checking our pay stubs. And sure enough, we were not paid for overtime on the last few peak days. Lunch shows up about an hour later, and not a single freaking person, outside of the managers, got up and took the food. Not only that, none of us put any overtime that day. At the end of the day, the management team tossed all the food. 3 weeks later on the next peak day, the same thing happens again, and then again on the peak day after that. The next time, the managing director comes on the floor in the morning and announces that there will be a change in the policy. Team, we're tired of ordering food and throwing it away. We're also keeping up with the volume of work on peak days. Food is anyone who wants to work through their lunch, and of course you will be paid for your overtime. In fact, we will be retroactively paying you for unapproved overtime on your next paycheck. But we need to get the work done, so let's come together on this. Turns out that one of the older ladies who had been with the company for like 40 years put in a call about what was said and happening to HR and a lawyer. She wanted her overtime paid. It got so ugly that HR ended up pulling badge swipes to see what time everyone left for a 90-day period and paid us for any missed overtime to the minute past our scheduled time. For some people, it ended up being several $100s. As scary or as overwhelming as it might be to go forward and say, "No, you have to pay me for this time you stole from me," what that older lady did was absolutely the right thing. And everybody working in that place who got affected by that should be thankful that she was willing to step up like that. And our final story of the day is by Reparth. You get what you ask for. I was working as a bartender in a military mess in Canada that offered a lot of different beers. A retired military, let's call him Officer Karen, got invited to an event, and when he came to order his beer, he only said, "Bring me a beer." I explained that we offered different kinds and brands of beer, but before I could start to list them, he cut me off and started to lecture me about his time in Europe, where bars sell their own homemade beer, and that you only had to ask for a beer and you get one. I told him it was all fine, but I didn't have time to brew a batch of beer for him at the time, so he would have to choose from the selections we had. He was probably just trying to live the good old days when he could take advantage of low-ranking soldiers. He was an officer before retiring, and I was only a corporal. So he started to give me crap because I wasn't giving him what he wanted. While he was yelling at me to bring him a beer, I started to think about what kind would satisfy him the most. We had some imported brands that would have been perfect if he only had listened to the list I was giving him. We kept local brands in a locker waiting to be put in the refrigerator, so I decided to bring him a warm Coors Light. I could have brought him a non-alcoholic beer, but I'm not a monster. I don't know if you've ever pissed off a military officer, but let me tell you, it was a sight to see. I started to think that I made a mistake since all my superiors were in this room, so they would probably take Officer Karen's side and take revenge on me somehow in the future. But as the Officer Karen was about to grab the beer, to throw it at me I guess, the commanding officer of the base calmly said, "Well, you asked for any beer, and it is a beer." Officer Karen only drank one beer with us that night. I think what's great in this situation is this guy was just trying to be a jerk and flex around, and it was one of those situations where, despite their former rank, you could just put the person who's acting like a jerk in their place and maybe make them think about being such a jerk the next time they ever show up in a place like that. OP did their best to try and explain that that's all they had, and that was just not good enough for Officer Karen. Sorry, buddy. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.